Hello, Bo. It's Mr. Michike. I'm going to be reading your essay aloud and commenting on it as we go through, and then you'll have a chance to listen to this and then go ahead and jot down your thoughts, what you hear from my comments, and then we can go over those together and see what our shared understanding of that is. And we'll start with the title. Um, Good for you for having a title, but it needs to be a different title than this Bartleby the Scrivener, A Story of Wall Street essay. Um, Come up with a title that reflects something about the argument that you're making in the essay, would be my advice for future pieces. Okay, here we go. The short story Bartleby the Scrivener, A Story of Wall Street by Herman Melville provokes us to question the kinds of human interaction that occurs in the workplace. So it should be provokes us to question, not provokes us to questions, as you have it here. The office is a space for human relationships to form. The office is a central symbol in Melville's story. Melville uses the office to demonstrate how the workplace tests the limits of personal interaction. The narrator comments on how there is a strangely impersonal limbo space in the office. This is highlighted by the fact that we don't see any of the characters outside the office. Sure, the narrator, Turkey, Nippers, and Ginger Nut must all go somewhere after work, but we don't know anything about their home lives. Instead, we just witness the trivial, often impersonal ways in which they communicate with each other in the workplace. Bartleby and his co-workers' impersonal relationships, the apostrophe should come after the S in co-workers, impersonal relationships with each other lead to Bartleby leading a very lonesome, forlorn, friendless life. Herman Melville in Bartleby the Scrivener, A Story of Wall Street, uses the loneliness of Bartleby and his co-workers to show the isolation of people in cities. So I would say this is a strong introductory paragraph. You lay out the argument effectively, and what I'll want to be looking for as we go on is that each of your body paragraphs has a topic sentence that helps to prove some element of that argument as you go forward. To the narrator, Bartleby is a mystery. Bartleby's quiet but impenetrable resistance totally isolates him from the rest of the characters in the story. While reading the story, many questions can be raised about Bartleby. What exactly is it that makes Bartleby what he is? Why can't he just compromise like the rest of us do and get along with society? What would he prefer to do? These are all questions that could have an answer. The questions never do get answered because the narrator barely makes any attempt to get any information about him. Obviously, you don't need an S after get. The only questions he does ask are ones related to work. Any attempt to describe Bartleby's character would be futile since we have practically no information on him. If we did ever make an attempt to analyze Bartleby, we would be flailing around in the murky world of psychoanalysis with just a little information on the real him. Okay, it can be hard to prove a negative, which I think is what you're doing here, which is that we don't have any way of knowing about Bartleby. Now, you say to the narrator, Bartleby is a mystery. Bartleby's quiet but impenetrable resistance totally isolates him from the rest of the characters in the story. The narrator actually spends quite a bit of time trying to get information and even speculating about what it is that makes Bartleby tick. So I'm not sure how exactly this piece or this piece of the essay helps to prove your thesis statement that Melville is using this to demonstrate the isolation that cities cause for people, partially because you haven't really talked about this as a um, quality that is restricted to cities or that something about cities helps to foster. So it's important, again, to have every element of your argument focused in the same way that your thesis is, and I'm not sure that that's the case in this paragraph. The narrator knows Turkey is a drunken Englishman who works as a copyist, but not much past that in the eyes of the narrator. Throughout the story, all we learn about Turkey is that he is a solid, useful worker in the morning. His face and his temper flare up after his lunchtime drinking binge every day, and he spends the rest of the day in a disruptive mood. Turkey doesn't seem to be a bad guy, just a good-natured man with a serious drinking problem. Similar to Bartleby, the narrator never makes an attempt to know more about him, which leads to their impersonal relationship. Now here I think you have more of a case that the narrator is kind of purposely turning a blind eye to Turkey. First of all, in any essay, you should be using specific examples from the text rather than just describing or summarizing that character. So there are plenty of opportunities for that here. Again, I would say you also need to put this paragraph in the context of the larger argument. So how is what happens here, how are the ideas you're sharing here helping to prove your overall thesis statement? That's not clear from this paragraph, and you really need to bring that into focus as you continue with the rest of the essay, or as you look to revise this essay. Like his co-worker, Turkey, the narrator doesn't know much about Nippers. He knows the general aspects of his personality, but only because it affects the narrator personally. It is demonstrated that he is not a morning person. He is barely a person at all in the morning. He spends the pre-noon hours nervously and irritably tormenting him and others, and in general he's full of discontent. It is conveyed that he's bitter about having to work for someone else, and he even takes on sketchy clients of his own at times. Other than this, the reader is not quite sure what Nippers is up to because of the lack of relationship between Nippers and the narrator. Again, certainly there should be examples from the text to illustrate each of the observations you're making here, and I don't think you'd have any trouble finding those. You end with a sentence that I think does a nice job of of bringing us back into focus on the larger essay, but that really should be at the beginning of the paragraph. The topic sentence should be the one that shows us how what is going to follow in the paragraph will help to prove some aspect of your thesis statement, and that's not the case as strongly at the beginning of this paragraph as it is at the end. All the co-workers really know about each other is their daily moods, what they like to eat, what they like to say, but not much else. They spend so much of their time together, but they don't know anything about each other outside of work. Again, it's hard to prove a negative unless you can actually have a character saying we didn't know much about each other outside of work. If it's simply that we never hear anything about their lives outside of work, that's not quite the same thing. And again, the importance of any of these observations is how they relate to and help to prove the thesis statement. So you should always keep that. Okay. They spend so much of their time together, but they don't know anything about each other outside of work. To each other, they are men without a personal history and without any meaningful human relationships. They know nothing about, that should say one another, but on another, that gives them those invaluable friendships that human beings long for. When Bartleby is on his deathbed, he says to the narrator, "I know you, and I want nothing to say to you." Without these personal relationships, none of the men really have true friends. They grow up alone, and like Bartleby, will most likely die alone without any true friends. Okay, first of all, good use of a quotation there, and if anything, we want more of that. The issue of whether these folks have true friends, we really don't know much about, but certainly the narrator is the one person we do know the most about in this story, and so you might be able to use examples from his life and the kind of loneliness of it, and the lack of meaningful friendships as far as we can tell, as a way of proving what you've said here. It is a sad reality, but many people live their everyday lives similar to the lives of the men in Bartleby the Scrivener. Wall Street, where the story takes place, is well known for being a bustling center of business and finance. Wall Street is notorious for being a place of gloom, stress, and depression. The workplaces where friendships and personal connection don't mean much other than people to sit with at lunch. Yet somehow, even with the gloom and depression, many people dedicate their lives to this lifestyle. Just like in the story, they grow up without personal connections, and many of them become depressed and lonely, just like Bartleby. The issue I have with this paragraph is that it really goes beyond the story, and I think it would be very difficult for you to include in an essay that is about Bartleby and what Bartleby has to say the something as vast as saying that Wall Street is a place where people don't make these strong personal connections. That's difficult to prove even within the context of a story, which is a very limited universe. To try and make that statement about Wall Street in general, I can't even imagine being able to prove that in a brief essay. So while that may be true and may end up being something to be considered in the conclusion as you kind of wrap up and move on to other thoughts about the topic, it really is too much to take on in the midst of the essay. The lack of human relationships in jobs can make cities depressing, unhappy places. Cities are huge centers of opportunity for people to find jobs. Are huge centers of opportunity for people to work and have jobs. Cities were originally made because they were hubs for people to find jobs, and I think you mean and opportunity. There are twice as many actively disengaged workers in the world as there are engaged workers who love their jobs. Again, I'll say that's a difficult thing to prove, and if you aren't going to prove it, it doesn't help really to move the argument forward. Since the majority of jobs make people lack human interaction, which in turn makes them lonely and unhappy like Bartleby. The witch in here obviously is not the witch that you intended, which would be W-H-I-C-H. These people are what compose the population of cities. Through this cycle, cities become gray and melancholic places. Herman Melville's story shows how cities turn into whirlpools of depression. I think you need an and there, loneliness. Okay, you've tackled some very big issues in this essay. In some ways, I think the places where you go beyond the story itself are problematic because it's just so hard to imagine proving some of these points. In the portions where you remain within the confines of the story, I think you have some strong ideas and good ideas that need to be more focused and fleshed out more carefully and in a more detailed way in order to make the essay as convincing as we'd like it to be. So I would say, as you think about how you might revise this essay, go back and look at what exactly it is you're trying to prove, and then certainly find passages from the story that help you to prove it. Think about what you can prove and what you can comment on, as opposed to, in a lot of the cases here, you're talking about what isn't there. So start maybe by looking at what is in the story that you can argue, and I think you'll need to find a stronger thesis statement and then work to really proving that thesis statement more effectively. Right now you have a lot of good ideas and good observations, but they aren't really coming together to form a coherent argument and thesis. So obviously that's a problem. All right, I look forward to talking with you about this, Bo. I think you have great ideas in here. It's just a matter of bringing them together in a more coherent way that allows a stronger argument to come through. All right, thanks.